Okay. I think I got the timing right there. And I think my mic's even working, which is just going to be a miracle today. Welcome, everyone, to another Wardley Mapping Conversations. Thank you for being here. If this is your first time, thanks for showing up. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend your day with us, or to watch this back afterwards. Either way, cool. And if you're a returning viewer, thanks also. Like, I couldn't do this without you, and I always am so glad to see your comments in the chat and things like that. It really keeps us going. Today I am joined by one Tristan Slominski. Tristan has been working on something really cool, and there's this general, like, I think interesting thread here about what it's like how does an open source community start, and how does contribution like work, and all these kinds of interesting questions about open source in general. But specifically for Wardley mapping, there's a really interesting space in the tools to actually make Wardley maps and share Wardley maps and so on. So with that, Tristan, could I set you up here to maybe give like a quick 30-second overview of who you are, what you do, and what got you into mapping?
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm Tristan Slominski. I've I've done various things. For the first third of my life, I've been in the U.S. military. And the last two-thirds, I've been with what I guess we would describe as tech. And so I've been doing tech stuff at various startups and bigger companies. What got me into mapping, I read a lot, at least I like to think that I do, and I came across Simon's posts. And what spoke to me there was something that Simon described for as business topology.
Mm.
And it spoke to my background from having to deal with military maps
Mm.
and military operations, and how maps are very much center stage in that environment. And I finally saw something that spoke to me, and I could organize all my thoughts and bring about a whole bunch of metaphors from my previous life into my techie life. So it was a very easy transition. That's why I
Yeah,
like it a lot, because it makes perfect sense to me.
that makes a lot of sense. And something that I've seen that like it feels like sort of where this is headed a little bit is like in the military you have sand table exercises, and you have normal topographical maps and things like that. And one of the value of using maps and then doing the sand table exercises is you basically get to rehearse and play out the mission in a way that enables you to sort of notice those moments where you're going to go, wait, what are we going to do here? And kind of rehearse, but both like from an intent deployment standpoint, like helping people understand what the orders really mean in context, but also from the standpoint of, is the plan good? Like, is there something that we're missing here? And this, if I understand correctly, like you in a sand table exercise, you literally reconstruct a miniaturized version of an exercise. And I've been thinking about this, like, that's like making a map come to life, right? Like you kind of turn a two-dimensional thing into a three-dimensional thing, and then you can walk around it and look at it and things like that. And so part of what I've been thinking too is like mapping is two-dimensional, but what happens when we start to like do like augmented reality and things like that? I'm looking forward to the moment where we can make a Wardley map and like get into AR, like just step into it and do like a sand table exercise, but for business. So
Well,
yeah.
I mean, well, have you used 3D graphs? They're not very exciting.
Well, I think 3D graphs are really hard to use, but what if I'm like throwing on like my phone or whatever, and I can see 3D space and annotation? I don't know. Maybe I'm optimistic, but we'll
I,
10
I,
years.
I agree with that. I think 3D works if you're actually embedded in the 3D environment. Our
Yeah.
brains evolved to process that, but looking at something in 3D, not as useful.
Yeah. Absolutely. So part of what I wanted to get into today is like when people contribute to open source, there's an interesting like question, and it's one of these like questions that I think stumps, I don't know, a lot of like orthodox ways of thinking about how work gets done. It's like, why would someone write something, build something for free, and then share it with people? And in the world of open source software development, I've had a couple experiences around that where, like, because I was a systems administrator, I would notice that like a piece of software that I was using was missing a feature, and I needed that feature. And heck, if I'm gonna write it, I might as well share it, right? That way, I can contribute back to this project, and the project can grow, and everyone can take advantage of it and make it better, and so on. But like, how does that sort of thing start? Because you're starting something, and other people are starting things, and like I remember back in like the very first map camp, I was jet lagged, and I was taking a nap in the crypt of the church where map camp was being held, and and I think it
Like
was,
one does.
yeah, as one does. And I think Richard Barton and I think Chris Daniel was there too. Like Chris Daniel was showing off Atlas, which at the time I think was like one of the first mapping systems that was software based. And then Richard Barton and I were talking about notation. Like, how do you have like a notation system for this kind of thing? And like, since that first day, there have been like 3 or 4 different variations of those same kind of things, some proprietary, some open source. And so there's almost like a journey that, like a story that needs to be told of how we got to where we are today. But I have the suspicion that people write software to scratch their own itch. And if they're going to write it for themselves, they might as well share it and help other folks. But I'm curious what motivates you.
Um, that's kind of that sounds like a apt description. So I actually have an open source project that's kind of extensively used.
Hmm.
It's a subcomponent in decentralized computing. So if
Okay.
like BitTorrent,
Mm-hmm.
they use a data structure to organize how to keep track of all your neighbors, that sort of thing, for
Yeah.
to exchange data with. And so I have a popular JavaScript data structure that uses it.
That's
And
really cool.
JavaScript is a popular language, and so that library ended up in a bunch of places. But I think so. I am most definitely reinventing the narrative here, going back, trying to recall how it happened, and it's probably going to be made up.
Yeah, of course.
But my guess would be GitHub was a way to maintain stuff aside from my laptop, and the public stuff on GitHub was free. And then I was like, do I want to keep it secret for anything? No, therefore it's public.
Mm.
And at that point, it was a hop, skip, and a jump to publishing it as a package and putting it out there. Part of it was also doing research in the open. I think that actually was more to do with it, which was I had a love affair with decentralized systems for a while, and I can have a whole lot of conversation about that. But I was doing a lot of research, and it was just a way to learn it, is to implement a working algorithm with working data structure to make sure that I understood exactly how it worked. And again, where do I put that stuff? I can put it on my laptop, or there is this thing that just will maintain it for me, and I don't have to think about it. And it's free, and the public free is the default. And so there, and then a whole bunch of people end up using it.
So if I may, like, so I'm gonna be in the Miro board here for a second. I have this like weird idea that maybe what you're describing is one flavor of this phenomenon that Simon talks about, which is that efficiency enables innovation. So if I draw like a terrible map outline here, very sketchy here. So we got stage 1, 2, 3, 4. If there's something down here that's commonly accepted and ubiquitous, like GitHub, right? Like GitHub's just like the default for storage and governance of open source projects in general. But also there's like this whole like developer credit thing where like you've got your commit history, and like there's this whole like thing around the culture of developers that GitHub participates in, which we could probably explode and dig into. But the fact that it's there already made it really easy for you when you're inventing something new up here to be like, well, where am I going to put it? like why not GitHub? And
Yep.
was that like a trade off decision that you were making, or was it just like a default that you were accepting because it was easy?
It's the power of defaults. It's
Okay.
it's that's the place for random projects that don't need to be kept secret. Only if it's, and then if you have enough energy, reason, etc., to depart from the default, that's maybe click that private button or
Mm.
something else like that.
Yeah, and for a while, GitHub didn't have private repos for free, right? Because they were I think
Yeah.
GitLab was the only one that would let you do private repos.
Yep.
And so for a time, like I remember having to make a decision about which place to put it. But the other thing on my mind when it came to open source stuff was like all the stuff that I didn't want to deal with. Like, what happens if my laptop gets lost, or I have to reinstall the operating system or something like that? And what if I've messed up backups? As a systems administrator, I know how many different ways you can mess up backups because I've
Yeah.
probably done them all. Um, so I'm like thinking, okay, GitHub can just handle all that for me, and now like if it ends up being something that other people like to use, then you can build a web page, do that in GitHub too, and all this kind of stuff. So I have this feeling that this kind of thought process is what informed what you and I were originally discussing before this stream, which was I think you called it a GitHub, but for Wardley maps.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the idea sort of behind Mapkeep, which is to bring something that's like an analog of GitHub, but specific for the Wordly mapping community.
Got it. And when you first,
Because the other thing about GitHub was also, aside from this being individual effort to do the library, it benefited from lots of input.
mm,
Lots of people with different specialized expertise who ended up using the thing are like, you can make this way more efficient by this suggestion. And that actually taught me. So I actually learned new things from those interactions. And also, if you're collaborating with anybody far away, you need a common place. And so you need the third place together. So it's the social network of it is a big part of
mm,
the appeal there for the open source stuff.
got it. And one of the first things that like like I thought of whenever you shared this with me was I'm thinking of all the other projects that I've seen, right? And so I gave you some crap. I gave you some perhaps unsolicited challenge, and we made like a little bit of a kind of had a little discussion around this. I was like, okay, so what's the map here, right? And I think I was like just sketching this up in Excalidraw at the time and throwing it at you. And I wanted to be able to annotate it and things like that. So of course I wasn't using your tool. And then you were like, "Well, I'm going to build a thing to make that possible. Then I'm going to build a commenting system, so on." So we'll get to that in a second. But I think like the general premise, and you can tell me what's off here, or what needs to be fixed, is that the community needs to share maps in some way, because sharing maps is a valuable thing. And from yesterday's stream, I think like one of the big things that emerged from that is that like there are some efforts that need slow decision making, and share like I think anything where you need distributed decision making or distributed sharing, you need to be able to have that opportunity to share what people are talking about or thinking about, making maps together and so on. And so yeah, I'm just like thinking sharing maps, obviously we got to make that happen. Well, you need to be able to make maps in order to share maps. So that's one thing. And then you need a way to like comment on the maps. So that's another thing. And then you need a place to share them. So like where do they go? So this led us to like a different kind of like little map here where basically okay, we got your community, you got your map sharing, you got your maps, and you have to render those maps somehow from data. And so there's this difference between the map as a visual artifact and the map as a data artifact, and a rendering process to convert the one from the other. One of the things I thought GitHub provides, which is really useful, is governance, or really like provenance too. Like whose map is this? Who's contributed to it? Who made these changes? Who proposed changes, etc.
I like how there's a word "who." in every one of those sentences.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. Oh no. Are you telling me AI maps are okay, I don't want to think about it.
Oh, we can talk about AI maps later.
Later. Am I gonna be out of a job soon? Is that what I'm about to learn? Um, and then like a data format, which is like I'm thinking of. There's I don't know. Basically, this whole like value chain in my mind is like, okay, how is this thing gonna work, right? And the one thing I'm noticing is that there's duplication of effort because I know of at least one. So there's Richard Barton, there's Chris Daniel, there's um, Chris Daniel was doing something I think separately from Damon Skellhorn, but then I think he and Damon conspired to sort of get at least create some interoperability there. So there's like Atlas was compatible with online Wardley maps, and then I think Adam Bohangle had his own like structure for data formats for Wardley maps, and then I know someone else built and I'm sorry, like I'm going to go look up the links for these. Someone else built an English language based version of what's otherwise a very like coder kind of based DSL. Like, and so instead of like doing here's the name of your component in a bracket and then like some number and then comma some number, it was like very like English language interpreted. So it was a completely different take on the data format because there was an interpreter that could kind of translate from human language back to this more like coder friendly DSL.
Are you talking about map script or something different?
Well, so Adams is map script, and then there's someone else. I'm gonna have to go look back through my tweet
Okay.
history to find it. But someone else did make one that was based on an English language, where it was just like I'll have to go look it up. But basically, what I'm noticing is like, and then you're here and adding a fifth data format, and so I'm thinking there's duplication, and like you have at least five different people going in five different directions. What would that be like to sort of work together on that stuff? So that's like the first thing I'm thinking of. The second thing is what are the weak spots in this value chain? And the first one I think we kind of got a hint at yesterday with that some decisions need to be made slowly. And so I'm like my first critique was basically the commit render view feedback loop is too slow if you're using a GitHub like interface, and that's what necessitated I think you building a map editor into Mapkeep. But then I'm also thinking again duplication. We've got like however many different map editors, and then the other part of this is like, well, in a GitHub like world, version control is a bit of a hurdle, especially for folks who aren't like steeped in the GitHub like way of doing things. So that was like just a bunch of the stuff that was in my head about what this was all going to take. And I was of course sitting here going like, why don't you just like outsource stuff to GitHub? Why don't you like use online Worthy Maps as your IDE? Why don't you like do all these other things? But like that's easier said than done, and also right. It creates risk because you have a bunch of individual projects that aren't necessarily going to get every single person's full attention over the next few years. So, and of course there be dragons, right? Because stylistic conventions are, for example, a constraint on how you build an IDE and how you make the maps in general, and we don't know what we're doing as a community yet with stylistic conventions. Like Simon's still writing stuff about like necessary and sufficient value chains, and I'm like, what? We can do that? So
yeah.
Okay.
Or the other day, he's like, squares are ors and circles are ends, and I'm like, what?
You can't just do that. Well, actually, yeah, you can, and actually that
makes a lot of sense.
And I feel justified for using flying logic, and which was like a tool for prerequisite trees, which uses that kind of language. I felt justified for using those for value chains way back when I first learned mapping. So I'm like, yes. Okay, so that's my like rant to the thing that we haven't even shown the audience yet. So I want to hand this over to you and maybe to like tell the story of maybe show us what it is, show us what you're imagining, paint the story of the future that you're looking for, and then maybe someone who watches this will find you on Twitter, which again you can always find our guests in the description on these videos, and maybe they can be one of those contributors who can provide critique or provide ideas and so on. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, and if you want to share your screen, I will, at any point, I'll make sure that the viewers can see that.
Okay, sounds great. Let me. So it's taking it from there. So let me just. So Mapkeep is intended to be a GitHub for Wardley maps, and part of the genesis for it was what I perceived as a lack of social network on the style of GitHub. I'm not saying there's not a social network. There's Mapcamp, there's everything. There is a community of mappers. But what I was looking for is to test the hypothesis that if we have a social network that's kind of GitHub analog-like, then maybe we can get more maps out there, grow the community, and make maps more accessible to everybody else. So Mapkeep is originated out of that desire. And in particular, specifically to what you mentioned, the commit render view loop, as I really wanted a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get editor. And so that's sort of what came out of there.
Okay.
So this, I'm gonna share. I believe I am sharing my Chrome window.
And
okay, excellent. So this is what a Mapkeep map looks like. This is the classic. This is the Futango from 2005 map from Simon Wardley's book. What I mean about the WYSIWYG editor is you can move this around, you'll get auto save, and so everything works. Tristan, scratch, I'm a map at this link. Any one of you can go there and you can see this public map, especially after it saves. I can easily add new components, label. This is what I mean about what you see is what you get. Move things around. I can right click and link things. I can redo, undo. So I wanted to vastly reduce that right render view loop so that I can actually see what I'm doing on the map. To your previous point, there's now beginnings of a comment system where one aspect I was thinking about is how do we tend to communicate about maps? Maps are visual, so text is not sufficient to communicate on maps. I cannot just make a comment and in a paragraph say, well, the node that you call the website, I think that it's the two media become divorced from each other. So the beginnings of the comment system are intended to have a visual component. So I can point at something here. Got it. And in the future, maybe add a text box. So that's a work in progress right now. And you can save that, and I can make a comment, and then I can share that with you. Additionally, I can go and vision for the future. Part of the comment system is integrated with part of like the change suggestion thing that you would think in GitHub pull commits. So you make a comment, then perhaps you suggest a change, that something should go somewhere else, and then all together with your markup, I moved CRM over here. With your markup, with your explanation, perhaps some prose, you can submit this entire bundle to the map author for consideration. And they in turn could reply to this using their own comment, their own visualization, writing, etc. So it becomes a visual commenting system along with some textual context as well. So that's the idea behind Mapkeep comment system. Now, and of course, I just love the undo redo. That's just such a pet peeve. So that's what's going on there. Now, this is an overview of Mapkeep so far, and for anybody interested, there's Mapkeep on Twitter, and also there's a YouTube channel to subscribe to updates. Now, I want to use Mapkeep to going to talk about some of the things that you've mentioned. So you've talked about duplication, comment render view loop, and then version control is hard to learn, and then why not use what already exists? So by the way, when you create a new map, you get these initial starting components. Power must be in the bottom right-hand corner because that's just the rule. And so let me get rid of some of this stuff. So one thing in answering to you and well, not answering, but commenting on the duplication of effort, right? So you said that there is like 5 different things, but notice where I'm putting them, right? This is all Genesis, right? So there's Mapkeep, maybe I don't know where you'd put Atlas or Atlas 2, but maybe it's here, maybe it's over here all the way in the product.
I think in general, it seems like on the whole, editors for Wardley maps that are based on software seem to be in stage 2. Maybe, yeah, probably mid stage 2. And that's because I think for the most part, well, let me think about that. Maybe that's wrong. Now I think about it, I was gonna say there are no two alike, and then I was thinking about the perspective of the user. If I wanted to be able to use a software-based editor, what would I do? And the answer is I'd probably Google for it and probably try out a couple. And at this point, there are software products out there that have implemented Wardley mapping. So like Wemvila by Rainmaker is one. They blocked me on Twitter, which, okay, all right, whatever. But like, so I guess I'm shouting them out despite that. And then like Atlas 2, I think that saw some usage, although like Chris could probably tell us for sure. And like in my mind, like Atlas 2 is probably the one that got a pretty like serious like foothold for a moment at least. And yeah. I think the only reason that's not continuing forward is because of not Chris does amazing work, and I'll just say I'm disappointed that he's not getting the support that he needs to do that amazing work in the future. And I guess, yeah, like maybe there's some early product like versions of this, and then of course we've got the new ones like MapScript, definitely in custom. Online Wardley maps, I would probably, because it has a VS Code plugin, that's like, I think that makes it like legit. Like, so yeah, like at least in early product there.
So I want to add something here.
Yeah.
I want to add like your data representation. And so
when you say data representation,
so you had on your map, you had where was it? Data format, sorry.
Got it. Yeah. It's like a DSL, domain specific language or something.
So what I'm thinking here is that you said that Atlas and online Wardley maps maybe share the same data format.
I suspect that Atlas has its own data format, but then it wrote an additional integration to create interoperability with online Wardley maps. If I'm remembering this correctly, I'm kind of fuzzy on the narrative a little bit.
Right. And so the way I'm thinking about it is there's data format there.
Yep.
There's another data format here. Right. And so, when you're suggesting that stuff should be reusable, when I look towards reusable things, I am looking, it's a work in progress. I am looking out here. Right. I am, if there is a standard mapping format, yeah, for sure. I would want to attach it. The world that I am seeing, at least through my framing, is I have a custom format. There's a custom format. There's a custom format. That there is some tendency to perhaps drive this forward, but it's very much still in the part where, for like development speed and optimizing the speed of change. Right. One thing we do inside here in Genesis is optimize for speed of change.
Absolutely.
And so it's far easier to have a custom format to iterate faster and faster and faster. And then if the data format standardization arrives, then pay the tax of moving on to the data format.
Yeah, and I think like there are a lot of good reasons for that, right? So on the one hand, you have a different implementation in mind of like and a different purpose for the component that is like the map editor and things like that, right? You're trying to build this like something that can tap into social networks and create like a accessibility and so on, right? So like your purpose is different, and so your implementation is going to be different, and your needs are going to be different potentially. So you might have a different like expectation for a data format than any of the other like solutions had before. So definitely right, like the cycle time needs to be quick, otherwise you're going to get like really frustrated, and that energy of like giving something to the world for free is going to quickly get like cut down because you're going to be waiting to negotiate on things, and that's going to be frustrating. And so holding that intention, so like basically autonomy and the ability to keep making maps on your own, or keep developing your thing on your own, on the one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin is the issue of sustainability. And so I'm thinking like if you want to go far, you go together. If you want to go fast, you go alone. And it's not one or the other either. It's like on which component do you need to go fast? On which component do you need to go far? And how do you notice the moments in time where you need to start transitioning from one mode to the other? And so like I'm not saying I have a good answer here, but in my mind I'm thinking, gosh, it's probably going to be annoying to have to manage and be completely responsible for all of these components. Wouldn't you like some help? And if that's this is naive, beautiful collaborative world, Ben, wouldn't you like some help? And also like maybe other people will see things that you don't see. But you're right.
So
it's
so
a
so
challenge.
other people for sure will not see what I see. And flip that around. I guess I should have said it differently. I will
It's
not
okay.
see for
We know what you
sure
meant.
what other people will see. The but there's also cost to the coordination, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also the framing of I mean, you've touched on it, is of the timing
Mm-hmm.
when the transitions happen.
Yeah.
Because my current work, I perceive it being as in Genesis. Then it also, from the Kinevin framing side of the world, it is a safe to fail experiment in the map ecosystem,
Mm.
right? So it doesn't necessarily need to integrate. It's a bundle of, this time it's going to be different experiment
Yeah.
in the ecosystem that I am fully willing to drive forward and see what happens. And if it fails, so be it. But to your earlier point, each of these offers a slightly different perspective. And what really the hypothesis with Mapkeep here is, maybe there is room for a social network open source style collaboration and a third place
Okay.
that I haven't seen develop so far, and we can go back to that if you like.
No, so I think that's actually like really interesting, right? Because so in there's a book that I have called Managing Flow, and it talks about yeah, it's by Ikojiro Nanaka, and it talks about the kind of ways that knowledge-based firms do strategy, basically, or well, really, it's about creating knowledge. But I think of Wardley Maps as a knowledge creation thing, which then informs a strategic thinking process. So in my mind, like knowledge is about strategy, at least in this like kind of way of viewing it. And one of the things that Nanaka and everyone else who contributed to that book what they talk about is each firm has a different view of how the world could be. It has a different like value of like what aesthetic truth, beauty, like excellence, like it has different beliefs and it envisions different futures. And I think there's something really amazing and valuable about having different firms that envision different futures. And so like I definitely see the excitement and energy behind having like a bunch of different people exploring a space. And then I sit here and go, okay, in terms of the value chain, what you're telling me right now is you have this vision of the future.
You wanna have the screen back?
Oh yeah, I guess I could draw. Let me see here. So if I'm in Miro, like I'm thinking, okay, you've got a vision of the future, right? That you're trying to realize, and so you're going to, in order to do that, you're going to serve certain users and needs. And in order to do that, you're going to build something, a built thing, and it's going to rely on I guess like dependencies, right? It's got a bunch of like things that it's going to depend on. And you're going to be tempted to build a lot of these in order to get that kind of like quickness of movement that you were describing earlier, optimizing for reducing the cost of change, and autonomy is like going to be really important to also just keep your motivation up. Otherwise, you'll be spending all your time negotiating. And so I also think like more built things that you have to take responsibility for versus negotiation with others. And as someone who's like kind of like sat here and like observed the narrative of Wardley mapping, of like how things have played out over the last couple of years, I'm thinking, okay, what can I do to make negotiation less hard? Like, is there like a, when you say that negotiation is difficult, and I like, believe me, I totally like think that trying to standardize something, especially when it's like stage 2 or stage 3, at least at first with stage 3, is hard. It's a lot of work to like come to an agreement on things, and like you have to have philosophical alignment on stuff, and you have to negotiate, and like you're not always going to get what you want, and all that kind of stuff is hard. But like, what are the obstacles to negotiation? Like, and one of the things that I think first is just like, who else is doing what? Is that true? Like, is it fair to say that part of what holds you back from, as an individual kind of contributor, like part of what holds you back from negotiating is knowing who knows what, and knowing who would be interested in working on what?
That's partially it. It's just the discovery aspect.
Okay.
The discovery, like I've mentioned, there's you have Mapcamp,
Yep.
you have the Twitter community, and then finding people. And but the other thing is also it's a small community, so it's not like there is a sea of email clients I can pull from. It's and because the community is still smaller, then each one of the solutions, I don't think we've exhausted yet all the different permutations of
Definitely not.
what maps can be.
Here's
So,
why this matters.
yeah.
I think so. Barbara said something in chat at the beginning, which like has been just sitting here like chewing away at my mind.
My chat left my window.
Oh
sorry.
no, it's totally okay. And she says the question is, which of these solutions, and this includes the solutions that are going to be built in the future, which of these solutions is going to keep up with the evolution of mapping itself, and which are going to stagnate and fall away?
Well, I would highlight that the one that can change the fastest is probably the one that can change faster than the others will probably is better predisposed to survival.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
And so hence the speed of change argument.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I then immediately go like, Tristan, you're one person.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I'll say something like, WhatsApp was 20 people.
Sure. Okay, here's the thing that I tell everyone when I see them building something and then like continuing to build it, and then it's like it's an investment of time and effort and energy that oftentimes could be more quickly okay, let me words are failing me here, so bear with me. Here's what I think is important. I think you have a vision of the future that is really interesting, and that's like GitHub like social network in the mapping community so that people can work together on things. Like and I even like I subscribe to this future. I think it would be amazing if based on a given topic or a social issue of the day or whatever it ends up being, a couple people can get together and say, okay, this is something that we should all like try to start understanding together. How are we going to make a map about this thing so that we can discuss it as a community? And I think that this sort of thing could already happen in like the DDD community. It's like, let's make a Wardley map about how to use like in which organizational context to use event storming or something like that. I don't know, I'm just making something up. Or like an architectural a heated argument about some like approach to event driven design or something like that. This is something we all need to understand together. Right now, that's like nigh impossible to do because maps are unwieldy to share because they're push. Like I can make a map and I can push it at you, but for you to like respond, you have to be comfortable annotating, you have to be comfortable recreating it from scratch, or if it's in like Miro or something, you have to be comfortable figuring out how to like version it somehow so that you don't like just tramp on someone else's work and mess them up. Like there's a lot of obstacles to collaborating on a map with others in a decentralized fashion. And I've done a lot of like the centralized version of that thing and the very like authoritarian version of that thing where I'm the facilitator and I will tell you when to contribute. So like that is a thing. And I'm sitting here going, what I'm worried about is if you build it, they will come being the mentality. And I keep seeing people like putting hours and hours and hours and hours into their beautiful visions of futures for mapping, and they build enormous amounts of technology. And I'm like, everybody who built one of these solutions did this, right? Chris put in so much work to make Atlas happen, and then to make Atlas 2 happen, right? And then like Damon did this for online Wardley maps, and Adam Bohangle did this for MapScript, and now I'm sitting here going like, Tristan's gonna do it now.
That's the life, man.
It's the life. I know.
That's what we are here to do.
But what if the opportunity to get feedback happened sooner and about a smaller part of the puzzle? Because right now what you have is like you have an editor, you have a feed component, you have okay.
So I wanna I want to highlight a specific framing that I have in mind because I have failed. I said last 2/3 of my adult life has been in tech, and I have failed a lot. A lot of different things, projects, etc. have failed.
It's part of the job, I think.
And so while this is a new project, it is the benefit of 2/3 of my life of failures. So it is by far, I've built way less technology than I have before, and I've built less way than before, etc. And build it, that will come kind of attitude is, there's much faster feedback now. For example, we're here talking about it. Before, there's like hardly anything there, faster feedback.
Good point.
But the framing I want to highlight is the concept of scale. So we typically think about scale, and I mean something very specific.
Okay.
Scale as in can have two familiar ways are, the most familiar is the scale and size. So you talk about something small like atoms, cells, organs, human bodies, societies, the planet, universe, like that type of scale, right?
Like that
so when I say
Powers of
scale
10 video that I've seen before.
Yeah, exactly. The powers of 10 scale. But then there's the other one that's also kind of obvious but less visible, is the time scale.
Yep.
which is how fast things happen. And we've touched on it on the commit render view loop, for example. And there are some experiments that, and so everything matters at every scale, right? So for example, if I feel sick or have a cough or something, that will happen at, that causes of that happen at the virus scale. And then it percolated all the way up and I'm like, oh, and I can't go to a meeting because I'm sick. So scales affect each other, etc. And so the highlight of that is that everything matters and at each different scale. And so the idea being doing a social network where the time scale of interactions is facilitated by computers and by the internet to establish a specific pace and cadence of those interactions, and like how the speed of how fast I can formulate a response or a comment. And the more friction there is, the slower that is, the less friction it is, the easier it is to output. That actually has material impact on whether that entire thing will succeed.
Okay.
So,
and just to be like really, really clear about the time scale
yep.
version of this, I have been infected by Jabe Bloom's rantings, and so I'm thinking there's Chronos time, which is like literally like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 2 years, and then there's kairotic time, which is like when things happen. So like
Chronos time.
So this is about.
I mean Chronos time.
You mean Chronos time? Because like when you said pace and cadence, I'm thinking like the event happenings of like people talking and commenting and things like that is like the thing that's conspicuous. But you're thinking Chronos time.
Like literally Chronos time. The ability to have an interaction faster changes the nature of that interaction. And so me writing a letter by hand will have a different content and different intent and different topics likely than me sending you a quick text or me talking at you right now, because of the time scale differences, the Chronos time differences there. And so going back to, so why is another thing being built and why not reuse other people's stuff is because it is what I've convinced myself of, whether right or wrong, this is where my framing currently is that there are certain experiments that need to happen at specific time scale. And facilitating this using something like Miro or here, let me be a facilitator and orchestrate your interaction, etc. What I might learn there might not apply if those interactions happen at different time scales. Much faster time scales, maybe because the loop is faster, that sort of thing.
So just to make sure I understand, like Miro is very real time.
Yes.
And there's not like like we were talking about yesterday in the live stream was just like this. There's no slow decision making in Miro. It's all like we're here right now, mapping, making decisions, putting things on the map, and so on. And so what I hear you saying is that you want to facilitate longer time scale interactions.
Yes and yes. So a contrast I can draw for the developers in the audience is pair programming versus code reviews versus pull requests. Those are actually 3 different interactions that are happening at 3 different scales. When you and I are authoring something together, something like Miro, real-time multiplayer thing, that's great. But if I put something out there in the open source world and somebody comes across it and reads it and like, hey, you could do this way better. Here, let me leave a comment. That is a different timescale interaction. And so that's sort of the experiment. So to build something to test all those interactions and see if they actually work, may just require just building it because it may work differently than alternatives.
So just to finish that metaphor and make sure I got it right, you said it was pair programming versus code review versus pull requests?
Yes.
And so pair programming, like
code review and pull requests kind of are the same, but maybe not.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess it depends on which version of that you're thinking of. Because like in my head, I was thinking an hour with someone on a meeting, on a Zoom call or something, going line by line. And maybe that's not the way that works.
Well, no, that's what I thought of code review. Yeah,
Okay,
and then
okay.
pull request more asynchronous through artifact communication.
So that could be
That
like 2 weeks or 2 years, really.
right. And when artifacts are involved, then there is a different style of communication of directly me to you versus communicating primarily through artifacts, and that has different dynamics.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so coming back to the GitHub kind of framing of this, we talked about letters versus text messages. We've talked about pull requests that are async versus code review versus pair programming. And I also heard a little bit of like Marshall McLuhan in there, I think, where it was like the medium is the message sort of things. Um, there's
Yeah,
a
like
constraint.
the cognitive artifacts, like the things. Yeah, very much so.
Okay. So the things you can write in a letter are very different than the things you can write in a text message. It would not be appropriate me for for me to send LOL and then an emoji in a letter. That'd be weird.
Yeah.
Um, whereas in a text message, that's like totally normal. Okay, so the kinds of maps you can make in Miro in real time are different than the kinds of maps you can make in an asynchronous, long time span system.
Right.
Okay. I have
And
been really curious about that idea for like how to enable people to share maps, because here's what happens all the time to me. Someone says, hey, here's this map, what do you think of it? And at best all I can do is provide critique in terms of like whether they mechanically have made a map, and whether they like conform to certain kind of general styles that I've seen. And then I can do like kind of a basic kind of inquiry where it's like, well, it looks like you're missing dependencies here. It looks like maybe you could do some research about this one, but I'm naive. I don't know their context. But what would happen if like you had a couple people who have a shared background and expertise and could do the kind of like long time span like mailing list style commentary back and forth? The trouble with mapping is it just feels so laborious, and so like people don't want to do it as far as I can tell. So
right.
talk to me a little bit about that and what you're envisioning for something like a GitHub.
Right. So the I mean, I can tell you the currently planned common system that's a work in progress, because that's the reification. I can tell, versus like what would it be like? Like, no, this is literally what I think it's gonna
Mm-hmm.
present itself as. Is the idea of so first let me say what's not. So GitHub and code. This is not maps. The coding analogy is just an analogy. It doesn't bring everything with it. So the version control system not is people don't the audience of people who truly understand version control systems is not as big as people who understand simple versions from other design areas. Like the one version control system I like is Figma, where you have just the latest version. That's what you're editing, and you take a snapshot, and that becomes a version in the past that you can go back to. Even if you recover that version, it just overwrites your latest. It makes
Ah,
your latest your snapshot, and then you just overwrite it and keep going.
so it's almost like is it like trunk based development in a bit?
It did kind of sort of, yeah. What's nice about that versioning system is if you want to make a presentation or animate a map, you make a map, snapshot, make a map, snapshot, make a map, snapshot, 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 and then you just go through your snapshots. Boom, boom, boom. Here it is.
And Figma
So
has like animations, doesn't it, for like transitions? Like I remember seeing some sort of feature that recently came out where like you can kind of it'll morph from one to the next or something like that. Maybe not with versions, but like
right, yeah. I
at least
mean,
with you can
it's
imagine
just
stuff is
snapshots,
possible.
right? So it's just computers, and
Just computers. Okay.
so that's one aspect. That sort of gives you that's sort of the shape that the mapping artifact is going to take. Now, intertwined with that, there is this concept of comments. And in my mind, where I'm currently at is comments have two parts, optionally three parts. So the one part I've demonstrated already, which is the drawing, the freeform. I just want to annotate something on a map.
Mm-hmm.
That is way more efficient than trying to describe which part of a map you're talking about in words.
Yep.
The second one is drop blobs of text, like exactly what you're doing, stickies on a map, to provide context. To you pointed at something, maybe provide some word context.
Yep.
And then the third optional, I'm not sure about yet whether that's useful or not, is your classic code style where you just write a paragraph below a map as a comment, that sort of thing. But in my mind, all those three dimensions comprise a single comment. They all go together. So when you get a comment from somebody, it's gonna be maybe pointing something on a map with some text context and maybe like some paragraph description. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's other resources, blah, 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 that sort of thing. And that gets dropped in the same timeline as the versions timeline.
Got it.
And then we can reply to that comment. That would cause a thread, kind of like Slack threads, where it's just a single threaded version, or you can create a new comment and create a new comment. And so what ends up happening is you have this timeline of a map with versions and comments at created time on them, with possibly some replies for threads. And that's analogous to like GitHub issues, where you have every new comment on GitHub is an issue, and then you have threads of conversation going with that. Okay. And what you can do is then animate through versions and comments if you want to, right? So you can present a map of like, here's where we were, this person suggested this, etc. Once that is in place, the commenting system and the versioning system, that's when it becomes possible to reuse those for a change control, like change suggestion system. This is the analog of the pull request. So your pull request then becomes, you have a map, you copy it, you move stuff on a map, then you add a comment to it, and your new map version along with your comment is your pull request. And it's like, I think you should do this, and I can look at it. And what's nice about all those formats, while you can't really diff comments, you can diff maps. You can see the differences between the maps. Like you said, once you have snapshots, you can do interesting things between them. So it's comments, versioning, and then change suggestions sort of thing to facilitate the conversations. So I feel those are not the essential pieces. There's also all sorts of kind of back office bookkeeping of, do you want people to comment on your maps? Do you want only, they allow listed people to comment on your maps? Do you, so that entire permission systems as well, it's like invisible, but it's necessary. Because it's a social network. And so there's only time to X until X happens. I'll stop there.
Okay, so I'm just making some notes like of what I think I'm hearing, right? So you've got like, you described firstly like the basic kind of version control system from left to right, like a new map, and then a comment on the map. That's like an increment in a version, and then the reply, and then the revision that might happen as a result of that. If you're a map author, you might revise it based on someone else's comment or your own comment, frankly. And so that's kind of like a basic model. But then you're saying there's a version of this where like you have your map, someone makes a copy of it, makes a revision, and then they issue like a pull request back to the revised map with some commentary or something like that. And so like very much looks like GitHub, doesn't it? Or just
it's like it's analogous but different.
Okay. Yeah, so one of the things I'm thinking about is like, where can we get energy, like people's interest and time and like, so I know that you're sensitive to the what to build first and in what order in order to not waste a lot of time. I know you're sensitive to that side of it. The other antidote to the if you build it they will come kind of approach is having a problem to solve, like as in like a shared problem that a bunch of people have, that they are feeling really painfully right now, and that they're thinking like, hey, maybe there's hope that we'll get like some pain relief in this new thing that's being built. And so then like that injects energy into the system, one, because people are asking you like, please we need this thing, but two, they actually use it for something and they become kind of like the core of like the user base, if you will. So I'm sitting here going like, what sort of problems exist in the world where multiple people who know how to map would want to have this kind of long time span experience. And where are those people? Are they doing it right now? Or are they... Do they not exist at the moment?
Let us know in the comments.
Yeah. So if you would like to join this effort at some point, please reach out to Tristan, reach out to me, and we can keep this conversation going. I think this is a really like fascinating kind of thing, that like an ongoing conversation that we could have with a lot of different folks in the community. Because like, if anyone should be good at getting the collaboration part right, and the making good decisions and intentional decisions about the components and so on, it should be us, right? As Wardley members. But the truth is we have a lot to learn still. And so Tristan, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to let me berate you about... No, really, like, I appreciate you taking the time to explain what you've been working on. Folks can check out Mapkeep if they want to check that out. There's a Twitter account, you said. There's also a YouTube channel. And I think it's mapkeep.com. Is that right?
Mapkeep.com.
All right.
Yep.
So,
but it just has a coming soon thing, so you won't get anything out of there yet.
Well, you can go there and give your hopes. And Barbara Frontera mentions climate change, question mark.
And she also mentioned the idea the product becomes the way that people do mapping. And so I'm happy to talk about that because I have thoughts in the future.
Ooh, okay. Maybe we should get Barbara and Tristan together and chat about that. I don't know. We'll just...
Thanks, Barbara.
Oh, man. I love it. All right. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for sharing your time with Tristan and me. We love to do... I love to make, like, just get new people in and, like, talk about stuff like this, get things that matter into the world, and, like, help people see what other people are working on. So if you have someone in mind that you think we should bring on to this kind of live stream kind of thing, let me know. Also, if you want to catch future live streams and see the ones that are coming up, go to lwm.events. You can sign up for our mailing list there. You can also just see the schedule of events. I know in particular on May 26th of 2021, we have a workshop intensive, a 3.5 hour intensive, really good for accelerating your Wordly mapping learning if you haven't really gotten the chance to do a lot of mapping practice. I highly recommend coming to that. We also run weekly kind of experimental practice sessions, I would say. So check out lwm.events to see those, and I'll see you on the next live stream. Thanks, everyone.